Hey guys, tonight we're settling into something that looks cozy, but is secretly plotting your demise. The Victorian home. Picture it. Floral wallpaper, flickering lamplight, heavy velvet curtains, a fireplace crackling away. Charming, right? Romantic even. Except every single one of those lovely details was, in its own quiet way, trying to send you to an early grave. The wallpaper was poisoning you. The lights were poisoning you. The water, the paint, the curtains, the face powder, the adorable little candles, all gently, politely, fashionably poisoning you. It was the deadliest interior design trend in human history, and people paid extra for it. Before we step inside, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And a real heartfelt thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. These recommendations genuinely shape what we cover, and this channel only keeps growing because of the people quietly tuning in from every corner of the world. So drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. Somehow it is always 2 a.m. somewhere. Oh, and we're now on Spotify as well, so if you'd rather drift off without a screen glowing in your face, the link is waiting in the description. Now, dim the lights, though maybe not the gas ones, we'll get to those. Switch on a fan for that soft hum, fluff your perfectly modern arsenic-free pillow, and get comfortable. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to live in one of these beautiful death traps? Could you tell that your bedroom wallpaper was breathing poison at you while you slept? Would you notice the smell, or just assume that's what houses smelled like? Could you survive a bath drawn through lead pipes, a dinner served on lead-glazed plates, eaten under lights that slowly leaked toxic fumes into the parlour? Would you last a single week in a home where the cure for a headache contained more mercury than a thermometer factory? Could you spot which of your lovely green curtains was the one trying to kill you? And would you, like millions of perfectly respectable Victorians, simply redecorate and carry on? Well, congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1860. You own a charming new townhouse, a fashionable green wallpaper, and a slow, persistent cough you can't quite explain. Make yourself at home. The house certainly intends to keep you. Good morning. The sun is filtering softly through your lace curtains. Birds are chirping, and your bedroom walls are gently exhaling poison. Welcome to the most fashionable bedroom in town, decorated in a gorgeous shade of green that cost a small fortune and may cost you considerably more. That rich velvety colour is called Shields green, and it owes its lovely vibrancy to arsenic. Yes, the murder poison. You have it on your walls in great looping floral patterns right beside your pillow, where you breathe against it for 8 hours a night. You think you're waking up refreshed. You are, in fact, being slowly seasoned. Here is the thing about Shields green, and its even punchier cousin, emerald green. No other pigment of the age could produce such a deep, alive, almost glowing colour, the kind of green that makes a drawing room look like a forest at dawn. The catch was that both pigments were built on a foundation of arsenic, and the demand for them was enormous. Wallpaper was the affordable luxury of the century. For the price of a few rolls, an ordinary family could make a plain little room look like the inside of a palace. Naturally, everyone wanted it. Naturally, the brightest, greenest, most desirable papers were the ones quietly leaking the most poison. The most famous name in beautiful wallpaper was a celebrated designer whose intricate floral patterns are still printed and adored today. His designs were exquisite. They were also, for years, packed with arsenic, which is little awkward given that part of his family fortune came from an arsenic mine. When customers began nervously asking whether his lovely papers might be making them ill, he reportedly dismissed the whole panic as the witterings of doctors who'd been bitten by witch fever. A confident position to take about a wall you sleep next to. And people did get ill. Across the century, doctors recorded a strange pattern. Families who fell sick in one particular room, children who wasted away in the prettiest nursery in the house, guests who recovered the moment they checked into a hotel and relapsed the moment they came home, headaches, stomach cramps, sore throats, exhaustion, a slow grey decline that nobody could explain. It took an embarrassingly long time for the medical profession to look up from the patient, glance at the cheerful green wall, and connect the two. Think about that for a moment in modern terms. Imagine choosing a paint colour, and the swatch card lists the shade as something like Lethal Meadow, and you say, "Yes, that one, that is the dream. Put it in the room where I keep the baby." Imagine an interior decorator assuring you the toxic option is simply more vibrant. Imagine redecorating, falling ill, redecorating again, and never once suspecting the wall, because surely a wall would not do that to you. The Victorians trusted their homes the way we trust a smoke alarm, and the home was returning that trust with a slow, floral betrayal. You stretch, you yawn, you take a deep, contented breath of your beautiful bedroom air, which is a worse decision than it sounds. The wall does not look like a threat. That is rather the point. A burglar makes noise, a fire gives warning. Your wallpaper just hangs there, looking expensive, being gorgeous, gently topping you up with arsenic while you sleep day after day, year after year. But a bedroom is dark, and you are awake now. So the first sensible thing to do is bring in a little light. You reach for the lamp. Oh dear. First task of the morning. Bring some light into this gloom. You strike a match and turn the little brass key on the wall, and with a soft pop and a hiss, the gas lamp flickers to life. Marvellous, modern, convenient. Also quietly venting a cocktail of fumes into a room you have deliberately sealed against drafts. Victorian gas lighting ran on coal gas, a charming blend that included carbon monoxide, the odourless gas famous for making people feel sleepy, then confused, then permanently relaxed. Every lamp you light is a tiny chemistry experiment, and you are the test subject who never agreed to participate. Coal gas was a genuine marvel, to be fair. Before it, you lit your home with candles or smoky oil lamps and went to bed roughly when the sun did. Suddenly, with a network of pipes snaking through the walls and floors, you could have light on demand, banishing the darkness at the turn of a key. Streets glowed, theatres dazzled, evenings became things you could actually do something with. It was, for the age, pure magic piped straight into the parlour. The fact that the magic was a flammable, toxic vapour seeping through joints sealed by a plumber having a rough week was treated as a minor footnote. Let us count the ways this charming convenience could ruin your evening. First, the gas itself was poisonous to breathe, heavy on carbon monoxide which binds to your blood and politely refuses to let go. A small leak you could not smell well enough to locate would not announce itself with drama. It would simply make the whole family unusually tired, give everyone a headache, and on a bad night tuck them in for good. People genuinely went to sleep in gaslit bedrooms and did not wake up, and it was often recorded as some vague natural cause, because who would suspect the lovely lamp? Second, there was the open flame, sitting in a room full of an explosive gas being fed by the same pipes. If a flame blew out but the gas kept flowing, you now had an invisible cloud quietly filling the room, waiting patiently for someone to walk in and strike a match to see why it had gotten so stuffy. The resulting redecoration was sudden and total. Whole rooms were rearranged this way along with the people standing in them. Third and more slowly the lamp simply ate the air. A naked gas flame consumes oxygen and breathes out its own fumes, blackening the ceilings, yellowing the paint, and slowly turning a cosy sealed parlour into somewhere you really ought not to spend the whole evening. By the time the family had sat under the lamps for a few hours, with the windows shut against the dreaded night air, the room had quietly become a worse place to be a lung. In modern terms, picture installing lighting that occasionally gasses you, occasionally explodes you, and the rest of the time just gently degrades the air until everyone is faintly headachy and cross. Now picture being absolutely delighted with it, recommending it to your neighbours, and considering anyone still using candles to be hopelessly behind the times. That was gaslight. The clue, frankly, was in the name. Still, you can see now, which is progress of a sort. You can see your beautiful arsenic wallpaper, your blackening ceiling, and your own pale face in the morning glass. Speaking of pale faces, you ought to wash. There is water in the jug, fresh from the tank. How bad could water be? Time to freshen up. You pad over to the washstand, pour water from the jug, and splash it on your face. Lovely. That water has just completed a scenic journey through a system of pipes made almost entirely of lead, sat overnight in a lead-lined tank up in your attic, and arrived enriched with a generous helping of dissolved metal. The Romans did this too, which should not be reassuring, because we named lead-poisoning plumbism after the Latin word for the very pipes delivering it to your face. Every sip, every wash, every cup of tea is a small, steady investment in confusion, fatigue, and a personality your relatives will eventually describe as not quite himself lately. Lead was the obvious choice for plumbing, and that is precisely the problem. It is soft, it bends easily, it is simple to join and shape, and it does not rust. A plumber could run it anywhere, coax it around any corner, and it would sit there quietly for decades doing its job. For carrying water from the main, up to the tank in the loft, and back down to every tap and basin in the house, it was perfect. The only flaw, a small one, easily overlooked, was that it slowly dissolved into the very water it carried and poisoned the family drinking it. Soft water and slightly acidic water were the worst, gnawing tiny amounts of metal off the inside of every pipe and tank. The water looked clean. It tasted at most faintly metallic, which everyone assumed was just how water tasted. And lead poisoning is a patient, undramatic thing. It does not strike you down at the breakfast table, it accumulates. A little stomach trouble here, a headache there, a creeping tiredness, aching joints, a strange grey pallor, and over the years a fog settling over the mind, mood and memory. The body simply files the lead away in the bones and keeps a slow tally. The truly grim part is that this fell hardest on children, whose small growing bodies soaked it up most eagerly. A child raised on leaded water from the family tank received a daily dose during the exact years it would do the most lasting harm, and nobody connected the dull, sickly, slow-developing child to the lovely modern plumbing they were so proud of. The water was a symbol of progress and cleanliness. It was also a thin, steady stream of brain poison, served chilled. In modern terms, imagine plumbing your whole house with drinking straws made of something the warning labels specifically forbid you to swallow, then running every glass of water, every pot of tea and the baby's bottle through them, for life. Imagine doing this not out of recklessness but out of pride, because the man down the road still hauls his water from a well like a peasant, and you have indoor taps like a civilized person. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the house is the upgrade. So you have washed your face in it, you will drink it in your tea, you will boil your dinner in it. It is in everything, quietly, harmlessly, looking exactly like water, because it is water, just with a little extra you never asked for and cannot taste. Of course, water is not the only thing in this house slowly leaching into you. Look at the walls again, the woodwork, the window sills. All that lovely glossy paintwork has a secret too, and it is a familiar one. Look around your beautiful home. The crisp white window frames, the glossy skirting boards, the cheerful nursery walls. all of it lovingly coated in paint whose secret ingredient is white lead, prized for its smooth finish, its brilliant colour, and its remarkable ability to flake off into fine, sweet-tasting dust. Sweet-tasting is not a figure of speech, which is precisely the problem when there are small children and bored pets in the house. Your walls do not merely sit there looking nice, they shed. And everything they shed you eventually breathe, touch, or, in the case of the family toddler, enthusiastically lick. White lead made the best paint of the age, and it was not close. It covered beautifully, it lasted. It gave a deep, rich, durable finish that cheaper alternatives could not match. So it went on everything. Walls, doors, window frames, garden railings, toys, furniture, the lot. A well-painted Victorian home was a well-leaded one. The proud homeowner, admiring his fresh gloss, was admiring a thin, decorative crust of poison spread over every surface a hand might touch. The cruel little twist is the taste. Certain lead compounds are genuinely, distinctly sweet, which is why one of them was historically nicknamed the sugar of lead. This is a catastrophic property for a substance to have when it is smeared at toddler height across an entire house. A small child gumming a painted windowsill or a painted toy was not being naughty for no reason. The thing tasted nice. The child went back for more, and lead, as we have established, is delighted to accept new customers, especially young ones. The grown-ups were not safe either, just slower to suffer. The men who applied the paint for a living developed a condition so common it had its own name, a painter's colic of cramping bellies and wrecked nerves and a strange wrist weakness, all from a career spent breathing the dust and licking the brush to a point. In the home, the danger was quieter. Old paint cracked, peeled, and powdered. It drifted into the air when you swept. It settled on the food, the bedding, the baby. The house was forever gently disintegrating into a fine toxic snow, and you were forever breathing the weather. In modern terms, picture coating your entire home, inside and out, including the crib and the rocking horse, in a material that tastes pleasantly sweet, sheds invisible poison as it ages, and is most harmful to the youngest, most enthusiastic lickers in the household. Then picture being congratulated on what a lovely job you have done, because the finish really is superb. The paint was not lying about being beautiful. It just left out the part where beautiful and lethal were, in this case, the same coat. And here is the part that ties the whole grim package together. The paint slowly poisons you. The pipes slowly poison you. The wallpaper slowly poisons you. None of it is dramatic. None of it is sudden, and all of it is happening at once, in the same house, to the same unsuspecting family, who think they live somewhere lovely. They are not wrong. It is lovely. It is also a slow-acting trap with curtains. You, meanwhile, are still standing at the washstand half-dressed, ready to make yourself presentable for the day. And making yourself presentable in this century is its own special adventure in self-poisoning, now to look presentable. A respectable complexion in this era is pale, smooth and luminous, which is why fashionable people achieve it by smearing their faces with lead. Face powders promise a flawless porcelain glow and deliver it, along with a slow corrosion of the skin that requires ever more powder to cover in a beautiful spiral of doom. Feeling adventurous? There are arsenic complexion wafers you can actually eat to whiten the skin from within, and drops of belladonna to make your pupils huge and dreamy, mostly because you can no longer focus your eyes. You're not getting ready for the day. You're assembling a chemical weapon and pointing it directly at your own head. The beauty ideal of the century was a pale, untouched delicacy, the look of a person far too refined ever to have stood in sunlight or done a day's work. Achieving it meant whitening the skin, and the most effective whiteners were built on white lead, the very same compound currently flaking off your windowsills. Slathered onto the face, it gave a smooth, otherworldly pallor. It also slowly damaged the very skin it was painted on, which created a perfect, profitable trap. The more you used it, the worse your skin became, and the worse your skin became, the more you needed to cover it. The cosmetic created the problem it was sold to solve. For those who found topical poison too indirect, there was a bolder option. You could buy little wafers, sold quite openly as a complexion treatment, whose secret to a clear, pale, luminous look was simply arsenic, taken by mouth, on purpose, with breakfast. The logic ran that a small steady dose gave the skin a translucent glow, and in the most literal sense it did, because mild arsenic poisoning can produce exactly that delicate, washed-out look right before it produces all the other things arsenic produces. Eating poison to look healthy is a remarkable round trip, and people made it daily. Then there were the eyes. The fashionable lady wanted large, dark, dewy, dreamy pupils, and the way to get them was to drop a tincture of deadly nightshade straight into the eye. It worked beautifully. The pupils swelled. The gaze went soft and bottomless and irresistible, and the wearer slowly lost the ability to focus on anything, developed a sensitivity to light, and with long use risked her sight entirely. The plant was called belladonna, beautiful lady, which is either the most honest or the most sarcastic name in the history of cosmetics. In modern terms, imagine a beauty routine that begins with painting heavy metal onto your face, continues with eating a notorious poison for that healthy glow, and finishes by dripping a toxic plant extract into your eyeballs so you cannot quite see how bad you look. Imagine all of it being not a dare, not a scandal, but simply Tuesday, the ordinary cost of being presentable. We mock the things people do for beauty now. The Victorians were quietly chewing arsenic and calling it self-care. So you finish your face, lead on the cheeks, a dab of poison for the glow, eyes wide and dreamy and unable to read the clock. You look, by the standards of the day, magnificent. You also feel, by the standards of any day, a little unwell. But everyone feels a little unwell, so you think nothing of it. A glass of water will settle you. It always does. You reach for one, blissfully unaware that the water is the next thing on this list. You are thirsty, naturally. You reach for a glass of clean, clear water, that universal symbol of health and purity, and take a long, satisfying gulp. Somewhere upstream, a cesspit is quietly leaking into the same supply, and you have just personally introduced yourself to cholera, or perhaps typhoid, the disease that famously killed Prince Albert and very nearly took the Prince of Wales too, proving that not even royalty could buy their way out of a bad drink. The water looks fine. It always looks fine. That is the entire trick. The deadliest thing in your house is the one that tastes like nothing at all. We have already accused your water of carrying lead, which it does, but lead is the slow option. The fast option, the one that could empty a household in a week, came from the simple fact that nobody yet understood where clean water ended and sewage began. Towns drew their water from rivers and shallow wells. Towns also disposed of their waste into rivers and the ground around those same wells. The two enterprises overlapped enthusiastically, and the result was a drinking supply that doubled as a delivery service for some of the most efficient killers of the century. Cholera was the showpiece. It struck in waves, swept through neighbourhoods, and could take a healthy adult from their first symptom to their last in a single brutal day. For years the experts blamed bad air, foul smells, the general miasma of the slums, anything but the water, because the water looked clean. It took a stubborn doctor mapping deaths around a single public pump to make the radical suggestion that perhaps people were dying because of what they were drinking, not what they were smelling. He was, of course, right, and it still took ages for the idea to win, because nobody wants to believe the lovely clear water is the murderer. Typhoid was the quieter, more democratic killer, and it did not care about your address. It moved through contaminated water and food and slipped just as easily into a palace as a tenement. The royal family learned this the hard way. The Queen's beloved husband died of it, an event that draped the monarchy in black for decades, and a few years later the heir to the throne caught it too, and came within a whisker of following his father. If the future king of the empire could be felled by a bad water supply, your odds in your modest townhouse were not encouraging. In modern terms, imagine pouring yourself a glass of crystal clear water from a source you fully trust, and that simple, healthy, responsible act being one of the riskier things you do all day. Imagine that the cleaner and clearer the water looked, the less it told you about whether it would kill you. We turn a tap, we drink without a thought. We treat water as the safe default. For the Victorian, water was a gamble dressed up as the safest thing in the house, and it won far more often than anyone wanted to admit. You drink it anyway. Everyone does. You have to drink something, and at least the water does not announce its intentions. The drains, on the other hand, announce theirs constantly. You may have noticed the smell. You have certainly noticed the smell. There is a smell in your house. There is always a smell in your house. You have stopped noticing it, the way one stops noticing a ticking clock or a slowly approaching doom. That faint, eggy, sulphurous waft drifting up from the drains is sewer gas, and the Victorians were absolutely convinced it could kill you, which, for once, was not entirely wrong. Your fashionable new indoor plumbing connects your cosy parlour directly to the vast underground river of everything the city would rather forget, and on a warm day that river likes to send its regards. People genuinely believed bad smells alone caused disease. They were wrong about the mechanism and entirely right to be terrified. For most of history, your waste went into a pit out the back and stayed there, gently minding its own business at a respectful distance. Then came the great innovation of indoor plumbing, a genuine leap forward in comfort, which worked by running a pipe from your home directly into the sewer. The convenience was unbeatable. The side effect was that you had now built an open conversational channel between your sitting room and the entire town's collected filth, and the filth had opinions it was eager to share, mostly in the form of gas. That gas was a brew of unpleasant things, the rotten egg stink of one, the explosive whisper of another, all bubbling up from the dark and seeping back through any drain that was not properly sealed. The solution eventually was a clever bend in the pipe that trapped a little water and blocked the gas, the humble device still lurking under every sink today. But many homes had drains that were poorly fitted, dried out, or simply built before anyone thought the problem through, and through those the sewer breathed freely into the house at all hours. The Victorians were not relaxed about this. They were, if anything, hysterical about it, and given the alternative theories on offer, the hysteria did some accidental good. They believed disease rode in on foul air, the so-called miasma, and so a bad smell was treated as a genuine threat to life. They were wrong about the smell itself being the killer, but the smell reliably pointed at the broken drains and leaking waste that really was spreading the diseases, so their nose was leading them, by sheer luck, in roughly the right direction. Even the royal family, after one of their own nearly died of a waterborne fever, became obsessed with the state of the drains, and great houses across the land were torn apart and replumbed in a national panic about what the pipes were exhaling. In modern terms, imagine installing a luxurious new feature in your home, and only later realizing it came with a permanent invisible umbilical cord linking your nostrils to the municipal sewer. Imagine a faint, sour, eggy haze being simply part of how a nice house smelled, so ordinary that guests stopped commenting and residents stopped noticing. We light a scented candle and complain about a whiff of bin. They lived above a breathing sewer and called it modern living. You have, as established, stopped smelling it entirely, which is its own quiet warning sign. The house has been training your nose to ignore exactly the things that might save you, but never mind the drains for now. It is cold, and a cold morning calls for a fire. You kneel at the grate, strike a light, and prepare to fill your lungs with the next thing on the menu. It is cold, so you do what any sensible person does and set a roaring coal fire in the grate. Instantly the room is warmer, cosier, and filling with a fine grey haze of soot, smoke, and a generous dose of carbon monoxide that the chimney is only loosely committed to removing. Coal smoke coats your lungs, your curtains, your ceilings, and your children, which is why everything and everyone in this era looks faintly smudged. Outside, thousands of identical fires combine into the famous fog so thick you could lose a horse in it. You're not warming your home. You're gently smoking it like a ham with the whole family still inside. Coal was the lifeblood of the age. It heated the home, cooked the food, boiled the water, and powered the whole roaring century. Every house had its fires, every fire had its chimney, and every chimney did a brave but only partial job of carrying the smoke away. A well-drawing fire sent most of its filth up and out. A sulky one, blocked by soot or beaten back down by the wind, sent that filth straight back into the room, where it had nowhere to go but into the furniture and the family. Indoors, the immediate hazard was the smoke itself, fine and black and endless, settling over every surface. This is why the Victorian housewife waged eternal war on grime, why curtains went grey, why ceilings yellowed, and why so much of the era looks, in hindsight, faintly sooty around the edges. Breathe that air day in and day out, especially as a child or as a servant tending the grates, and your lungs paid the rent. Coughs, wheezes, the persistent chest trouble that haunted the century, all of it had a thick black thumbprint of coal smoke on it. The quieter killer, again, was carbon monoxide. The same colourless gas slipping out of the lamps now also produced by every fire that didn't vent properly. A blocked flue, a damper closed too far, a chimney choked with soot, and the gas backed up into the room instead of out of the roof, building slowly in the warm, sealed air. The early symptoms were a headache and a heavy drowsiness, easily mistaken for simply being cosy by the fire, which is the cruelest possible disguise for a poison whose whole method is to make you too sleepy to leave the room. Step outside and the problem only scaled up. When an entire city lit its fires on a cold, still day, the smoke had nowhere to rise and pooled at street level into the legendary fog, a thick, yellow, choking soup that blotted out the sun, swallowed the streets, and crept into every lung in town. It was not weather. It was the collective exhalation of 1,000,000 chimneys hanging in the air, and people walked through it, worked in it, and breathed it as a normal feature of winter. In modern terms, imagine that the only way to stay warm was to light a small bonfire in your living room, accept a constant fine drizzle of soot over everything you owned, and trust a single brick tube to carry away a gas that quietly kills you if it gets lazy. Then step outside into a city-wide version of the same smoke and call it a brisk morning. We adjust a thermostat and grumble. They lit a controlled fire indoors and hoped the chimney was in a good mood. The fire does warm the room, at least, which feels like a small victory until you notice the wall behind it. The warmth has reached the damp patch in the corner, and the damp, as it happens, has been busy. Notice that creeping chill along the lower walls, that faint bloom of black spotting in the corner, that wallpaper beginning to bubble and peel. Damp has moved in, and damp is not a tidy house guest. In most homes it merely rots the plaster and ruins the mood. In your home, where the walls are coated in arsenic-rich green pigment, the damp wakes up a microscopic mould that feasts on the arsenic and politely exhales it back into your bedroom as a toxic gas. Your house has, in effect, learned to cook its own poison and serve it warm. The damper it gets, the deadlier it becomes, which is a truly remarkable feature for a wall to have. Damp was the chronic ailment of the Victorian house. The walls drew moisture up from the ground, the windows wept, the coal fires threw out heat, but the rooms stayed cold and wet in the corners, and condensation gathered wherever warm breath met a cold surface. The result was the familiar bloom of mould, that black and green speckling along skirting boards and behind furniture, which every generation has griped about. On an ordinary wall, it is unsightly and unhealthy in the ordinary ways. On a wall papered in arsenic green, it becomes something genuinely sinister. Here is the grim chemistry, and it is worth dwelling on because it is the dark heart of the whole arsenic story. The bright green pigment was laid down dry and stable, and a dry wall in a dry room was relatively content to keep its poison to itself. But introduce damp, and a certain mould moves in and starts to feed on the arsenic compound in the paper. As it digests it, it gives off a gas, and that gas is itself poisonous, with a faint, distinctive, garlicky smell. The wall, in other words, was not merely sitting there being toxic. Under the right damp conditions, it was actively manufacturing and releasing fresh poison into the air of the room around the clock. This explained the mysterious cases that had baffled doctors, the families who sickened only in the damp months, the rooms that were lethal in a wet winter, and merely unpleasant in a dry summer, the green nursery that quietly took one child after another. It was not the dry pigment alone. It was the marriage of arsenic wallpaper and damp wall, a partnership that turned a beautiful decoration into a slow, breathing gas chamber, busiest precisely when the weather kept everyone indoors with the windows shut. In modern terms, imagine a mould problem that did not merely look bad and aggravate your chest, but actively ate your wallpaper and converted it into airborne poison, working harder the wetter your house became. Imagine that the damp corner everyone ignores was not just a decorating nuisance, but the trigger for the whole lethal mechanism. We see mould and reach for the spray and a dehumidifier. They saw mould, sighed about the plaster, and went on breathing whatever the wall had decided to cook up that week. The truly maddening part is that the warmth of the fire you just lit, drying one patch while the damp creeps back into another, only kept the whole cycle turning. The house was a closed loop of its own poisons, and you were standing right in the middle of it, getting dressed, breathing deep, ready to check yourself in the mirror. The mirror, of course. Even the mirror is in on it. You check your reflection in the looking glass, that gleaming silvery surface that makes the whole room feel grand. Behind that glass is a thin layer of tin and mercury, slowly evaporating into the air you're currently breathing while you admire your toxic complexion. Mercury, the trembling silver metal, was everywhere this century. In your mirrors, in your medicines, in the felt hats that drove an entire profession quietly mad, which is exactly where the phrase about being a certain kind of hatter comes from. You think you're simply checking whether your collar is straight. You're also taking a small, unrequested dose of one of the most enthusiastic neurotoxins known to humankind. Mercury fascinated people for centuries, and no wonder. It is the only common metal that is liquid, a shimmering silver bead that rolls and splits and shivers in the hand like something alive. That strangeness made it seem powerful, almost magical, and so it found its way into 100 uses long before anyone grasped that it quietly poisons the nerves of everyone who handles it. The Victorians inherited this enthusiasm wholesale and put the trembling metal to work all over the home. Older mirrors were backed with a bright amalgam of tin and mercury, painstakingly applied to give that flawless reflective sheen. The finished mirror looked solid and harmless, but the backing was never entirely still. over time it released faint mercury vapour, and the people who made these mirrors, breathing it in their workshops, suffered terribly for the privilege of letting the rest of the world admire itself. In the home the dose was smaller, just a gleaming surface quietly exhaling on the wall, but it was one more invisible contribution to an already crowded atmosphere of fumes. Mercury did not stop at the mirror. It turned up in medicines, where a popular mercury compound was handed out for all manner of complaints, dosed until the patient's gums grew sore and the teeth loosened, a clear sign of poisoning that doctors confidently took as proof the treatment was working. And it lurked in the hat trade, where workers used a mercury solution to turn fur into felt, breathing the vapour in hot, closed workrooms until their hands shook, their speech slurred, their memory frayed, and their tempers turned strange and volatile. The condition became so common in that one profession that the language simply absorbed it, and to be as mad as a hatter passed into everyday speech as a cheerful idiom for a tragedy nobody had bothered to fix. In modern terms, imagine a metal so obviously alarming that the very sight of it shivering in a dish should set off every instinct you have, and then imagine cheerfully backing your mirrors with it, dosing your illnesses with it, and building an entire industry on workers breathing it until they lose their minds, with the resulting madness becoming a fond little turn of phrase. We seal off a single broken thermometer and call a clean-up service. They hung mercury on the wall and leaned in close to fix their hair. So you straighten your collar, admire your lead-whitened face and your dreamy belladonna eyes in your gently gassing mirror, and pronounce yourself ready for the day. The wallpaper breathes, the lamp hisses, the pipes drip, the paint flakes, the drains exhale, the fire smokes, the damp cooks, the mirror gleams, and you, freshly poisoned from every direction before breakfast, step out to face the rest of a house that has only just begun. There is, after all, still the small matter of getting properly dressed, and the clothes, you will be unsurprised to learn, have plans of their own. Feeling poorly? Of course you are. Given everything we have covered so far, happily your home is stocked with remedies, and by remedies I mean a tidy little cabinet of opium, mercury, cocaine and arsenic, all available without so much as a raised eyebrow from the chemist. Got a cough? Have some laudanum, which is opium dissolved in alcohol, and is also what you give the baby. Feeling run down? A spoonful of arsenic tonic will put the colour back in your cheeks, mostly by mildly poisoning you into a flush. There is a cure for everything in this house, and nearly all of them are slowly killing you, which at least keeps the symptoms varied. The crown jewel of the cabinet was laudanum, a tincture of opium that you could buy by the bottle, cheaper than wine and roughly as regulated. People took it for pain, for coughs, for nerves, for sleeplessness, for the simple crushing weariness of life, and they took rather a lot of it. A few drops eased the ache, a few more eased the worry. Before long, a great many perfectly respectable households had a quiet, steady relationship with a powerful narcotic, dosed by eye, from a bottle on the shelf, between the vinegar and the cough lozenges. Worse, it did not stop with the adults. There were soothing syrups sold expressly for fretful infants, marketed to exhausted mothers and nursemaids as a gentle aid to a peaceful night, and their gentle secret ingredient was opium or morphine. They worked superbly. The baby that would not settle went quiet, slack and serene within minutes. Sometimes the baby went a little too serene and did not wake again, and these losses were quietly absorbed into the era's already staggering rate of infant death, blamed on weak constitutions rather than the spoonful of narcotic administered with love. The rest of the cabinet kept up the theme. There were tonics built on arsenic, sold to improve the complexion and the energy, which is a bold claim for a poison. There was a popular mercury preparation handed out for almost any complaint, dosed until the gums bled. There were toothache drops for children laced with cocaine, and bracing cough mixtures that combined several narcotics into a single confident swig. None of it required a doctor, a prescription, or a second thought. The chemist simply weighed it out, the customer simply paid, and the household simply medicated itself into a haze. In modern terms, imagine a bathroom cabinet where the headache remedy is heroin's grandfather. The children's teething aid is a controlled substance, the energy tonic is arsenic, and the all-purpose cure-all is a heavy metal that loosens your teeth. Imagine all of it sold openly, advertised cheerfully, and trusted completely, because surely a thing you can buy at the corner shop could not be dangerous. We read warning labels and worry about the recommended dose. They eyeballed opium into the baby and called it a quiet night. So you take something for that vague morning unwellness, the one caused by the wallpaper and the water and the lamp and the paint and the mirror, and the something makes the unwellness float pleasantly away for a while. You feel, briefly, marvellous. You feel ready at last to get properly dressed. And getting dressed, in a home lit entirely by open flame, is about to introduce a more sudden category of danger than anything we have met so far. Time to dress properly. You step into your layers of skirts, petticoats, and the great hooped cage of a crinoline, achieving the fashionable silhouette of a walking lampshade. There is just one small design flaw. You live in a house lit entirely by open flames, and your enormous, billowing, highly flammable outfit has a real habit of drifting too close to the fire. Thousands of women in this era did not die of poison or plague. They died because their dress brushed a candle and went up like a torch while they were trapped inside a structure built specifically to prevent quick movement. Fashion, it turns out, can be fatal in the most literal sense. The crinoline was a genuine engineering achievement, a lightweight cage of steel hoops that held the skirt out in a vast graceful dome without the wearer having to haul around layers of heavy petticoats. It was liberating in its way and wildly popular, and it made the fashionable woman roughly the width of a small dining table. The trouble was the proportions of the thing. A great bell of light, airy fabric swung out far beyond the body in a world where every room contained at least one open flame at hip height, and the wearer could not see, feel, or control the lower edge of her own outfit. The result was a steady, horrifying toll of dress fires. A skirt drifted too near the grate, brushed a candle, swept past a lamp, and the light fabric caught instantly. By the time the wearer felt the heat, the whole cage was alight, and the very structure that made the silhouette so admired now held the burning fabric out away from any hope of beating it out, while the layers fed the flames. Quick movement was impossible. Smothering it was impossible. Across the century, the death count from this single fashion ran into the thousands, a slow massacre by interior decoration. Some of the dead were famous. There were sisters who went up at a ball, their dresses catching as they twirled near a fireplace, dying within days of their burns, an event that scandalized society without meaningfully changing the fashion. And the crinoline found other ways to kill besides fire. It caught in carriage wheels and machinery and dragged its wearer along. It acted as a sail in a strong wind and pitched women off cliffs and into water. It was all told a remarkably hazardous thing to simply put on in the morning. Even the humbler garments conspired. A soft, fuzzy, brushed cotton was beloved for nightgowns and children's clothes because it was warm and cheap and cosy. And it also happened to ignite with terrifying ease, turning bedtime near a fire into a recurring gamble. The whole wardrobe of the age seemed designed by someone who had never met an open flame, in a house that contained nothing else. In modern terms, imagine an outfit so wide you cannot judge where it ends, made of fabric that lights like tissue paper, worn every single day inside a building heated and lit entirely by fire, with no way to move quickly and no way to put yourself out. Imagine wearing it anyway, because the look was simply that good. We worry about a loose sleeve near a stovetop. They strapped on a flammable dome and waltzed past the candles. You survive getting dressed, which is not guaranteed. Now for the finishing touches, the comb, the collar, the little accessories that complete the ensemble. They are made from a thrilling new material, and the thrill, it turns out, is mostly thermal. Let us accessorize. You reach for your handsome new comb, your stiff white detachable collar, perhaps a smart set of cuffs, all made from the miracle material of the age, celluloid, the very first plastic, prized for looking exactly like ivory at a fraction of the cost. It has only one tiny temperament issue. Celluloid is wildly, almost gleefully flammable, prone to bursting into flame or occasionally exploding outright when it gets too warm, which is delightful in a hair comb worn beside a hot stove. You're not getting dressed up. You're strapping low-grade fireworks to your throat and skull, and stepping confidently toward the nearest candle. Celluloid felt like the future, and in fairness it was. For the first time, ordinary people could own things that looked like luxury. Tortoiseshell combs, ivory trinkets, polished collars and cuffs and jewellery that had once been the preserve of the wealthy could now be moulded cheaply from this glossy new substance and sold to everyone. It imitated the expensive materials so well that the difference was hard to spot, and it transformed what an ordinary person could afford to wear. The age fell in love with it, and stuck it on, in and around everything. The catch lived in the chemistry. Celluloid was built largely from the same family of compounds used to make explosives, gentled with a solvent into something stable enough to mould, but never quite forgetting its origins. Warm it up, hold it near a flame, or simply let it sit too long near a heat source, and it could ignite with astonishing speed, burning fast and fierce, and in some cases popping like a small charge rather than merely catching. This was an alarming personality for a material people wore directly against the skin, in the hair, around the neck, all day, in a house full of fire. Picture the everyday scenes. A woman heats an iron rod to curl her hair, and works it close to a celluloid comb holding the style in place. A man leans over a gas flame in a stiff celluloid collar. A child plays near the hearth with a toy moulded from the stuff. Any of these little tableaux could turn, without warning, into a sudden bright flare at exactly the worst possible distance from a face. Even the new billiard balls made of celluloid had a reputation for the occasional sharp crack when struck hard, which startled the players considerably and said something uncomfortable about what they were wearing. In modern terms, imagine that the cheap, fashionable, must-have accessory of the season looked gorgeous, cost almost nothing, and was made from a cousin of gunpowder that could flash into flame or burst when it got warm. Imagine wearing it in your hair, against a curling iron, beside a fire, every day, and considering yourself stylish and modern for doing so. We fret about a phone overheating in a pocket. They clipped explosives to their collars and called it progress, so now you are fully assembled, head to toe, in poison, flame, and the odd low explosive, and you look, by the standards of the day, absolutely splendid. The finishing touch, of course, is colour, and there is one colour above all that the fashionable simply must wear this season. You may have already guessed which one. It is the same charming shade currently breathing at you from the bedroom wall. Have you noticed how much green there is this season? It is everywhere, in gowns, gloves, artificial flowers, candle wax, children's toys, even tucked into the icing on fancy cakes. That gorgeous, impossible, jewel-bright green is the absolute height of fashion, and it is made with arsenic. The same poison on your walls is also stitched into your wife's ball gown. dusting off onto the dance floor in little toxic clouds at every party, a phenomenon the newspapers dryly nicknamed something close to a dance of death. Wearing this season's colour does not merely turn heads. It slowly poisons the wearer, the maker, and anyone unlucky enough to share a crowded, sweaty room with them. The problem, once again, was that no other green came close. The arsenical pigments produced a colour so vivid, so alive, so flatteringly bright under candlelight that nothing else could compete. So the fashion houses used it lavishly, and the green gown became the centrepiece of any well-dressed gathering. The trouble was that the pigment did not bind well to the fabric. It sat on the surface as a fine dust, and it came off in alarming quantities onto the skin of the wearer and into the air around her with every step and twirl. A single fashionable gown could carry a frankly murderous quantity of arsenic in its dye, far more than enough to kill, distributed across the dress as a loose powder waiting to be shaken free. At a warm, crowded ball, the dancers shed it into the air in little clouds, breathed it, sweated it onto their own skin, and carried it home in their hair. Satirical cartoonists drew skeletons in ball gowns whirling across the floor, which was less of a joke than it looked. The wearer of the most admired dress in the room was quite literally the most poisoned person at the party. The people who paid the steepest price never wore the dresses at all. The artificial flower makers, mostly young women, spent their days handling the brilliant green powder to colour silk leaves and petals, breathing it, eating their lunch beside it, absorbing it through their hands. They sickened horribly, with ulcerated skin, ruined stomachs, and green-tinged everything, and some of them died young and publicly, their deaths reported as cautionary tales that everyone tutted over and nobody acted upon. The flowers were lovely. The girls who made them wasted away making them, and it was not confined to clothing. The same green-tinted candles, toys, paper, and even, in some appalling cases, the coloured sugar work and confectionery on the table, so that a child might be poisoned by an ornamental green leaf on a celebration cake. The colour of luxury, of nature, of springtime, had been bottled from a poison and splashed across every surface of fashionable life, indoors and out, on adults and children alike. In modern terms, imagine that the trendiest colour of the year, the one in every shop window and on every well-dressed person, was made from a substance you keep locked away from pets and children, and that wearing it shed that substance into the air of every room you entered. Imagine the people who made it dying of it while the people who wore it danced in it. We agonise over whether a dye might irritate sensitive skin. They wore arsenic to the ball and called it the look of the season. You're dressed, accessorised, and colour-coordinated in lethal green, and you're getting hungry. It is time to head downstairs to the kitchen, the warm heart of the home, where breakfast awaits in pots and on plates that have been quietly waiting to make their own contribution. Down to the kitchen, the warm beating heart of the home, where your food is lovingly prepared in vessels that are quietly seasoning it with metal. Your cheerful glazed crockery is finished with a lead glaze that leaches happily into anything acidic. Your pewter mugs are part lead. Your handsome copper pots, if not scrupulously cleaned, develop a greenish crust called verdigris, which is poisonous and was sometimes added on purpose to make pickles look a more appetizing green. Every meal in this house is a gamble, and the house is the one holding the dice. You think you're cooking dinner. You are, in a sense, being prepped. Start with the crockery. That bright, shiny glaze on your everyday plates and bowls and jugs got much of its glossy finish from lead, and lead glaze has a quiet vice. When it meets anything acidic, it begins to dissolve. Store a fruit preserve in a glazed jar. Leave a tomato dish in a glazed bowl. Pour cider or vinegar into a glazed jug, and the food slowly draws the lead out of the glaze and into itself. The cheaper and more poorly fired the pottery, the worse the leaching, which meant the poorest households, buying the roughest crockery, often got the heaviest dose. The drinking vessels did their part too. Pewter, that handsome dull silver metal beloved for mugs, plates and tankards, was an alloy that often contained a generous share of lead. Fill a leaded tankard with something acidic, say a sharp ale or a fruit drink, let it sit, and you had brewed yourself a slow, leaded cocktail in a vessel you trusted completely. People drank from the same family pewter for years, topping themselves up a little with every cup, wondering vaguely why their joints ached and their tempers had soured. Then the copper pans, gleaming and prized in any serious kitchen. Copper is a superb conductor and a beautiful pot, but bare copper reacts especially with acidic or salty food, forming that bluish-green crust of verdigris, which is itself poisonous. Good kitchens line their copper with a thin coat of tin to keep the food off the metal, but tinning wore through with use and scrubbing, exposing the copper beneath to the next acidic source. Worse, some cooks and grocers exploited the reaction deliberately, using copper to deepen the green of pickles and preserved vegetables, poisoning the food on purpose to make it prettier. Even the tinned food on the shelf had a secret, for the seams of those marvellous new-sealed cans were often soldered with lead, which seeped into whatever sat inside, especially the acidic contents. Over the long months, a can might wait in the larder. The convenience of preserved food came with a faint metallic dividend in every tin. In modern terms, imagine a kitchen where the plates dissolve poison into your fruit, the mugs lace your drink with lead, the pots grow toxic crust unless constantly maintained, someone occasionally poisons the pickles on purpose for the colour, and the tinned goods come pre-seasoned with solder. Imagine all of it looking clean, normal and rather nice on the dresser. We worry about whether a pan is non-stick safe. They cooked in a kitchen that contributed a little something extra to every single course. So your meal arrives already enriched, before a single ingredient is considered. And the ingredients, it turns out, deserve their own dark chapter. Because in this century, the food itself has been tampered with long before it ever reaches your dangerous pots and poisonous plates. Let us inspect the pantry, where the food itself has been tampered with long before it ever reaches your dangerous pots. In an age before any meaningful regulation, grocers stretch their profits with creativity bordering on villainy. Your bread is bulked out with alum and chalk. Your milk is watered down and topped up with a little something to hide it. Your tea leaves are recycled, re-dyed and resold. Your bright yellow sweets and your mustard owe their cheerful colour to lead. Your pickles are greened with copper. The old phrase about there being death in the pot was not poetry. It was a fairly accurate description of the average grocery list. The logic of the cheat was simple and relentless. A grocer who could stretch his flour, water his milk or pad his pepper with something cheaper sold more for the same outlay, and a grocer who refused to do so was undercut by the ones who did. With no inspectors, no labels and no laws worth the name, adulteration was not a fringe crime but the ordinary condition of the food supply. The honest seller was the unusual one, and the customer had no way to tell the difference until the symptoms arrived. Bread, the staple of every table, was a particular victim. Bakers whitened cheap, dingy flour with alum, which made the loaf look finer and whiter than its quality deserved, and bulked it out with chalk, ground bones, or worse. The result looked like good bread, weighed like good bread, and slowly upset the stomachs and bowels of everyone who lived on it, which in the poorest homes was nearly everything they ate. Milk fared no better, watered down to stretch it, then doctored with additives to restore the colour and hide the dilution, and sometimes drawn from sickly cows kept in filthy conditions on the swill of distilleries. The deceptions ran into the dangerous. Used tea leaves were dried, re-dyed with colourings that sometimes included copper or lead compounds, and sold again as fresh. Sweets and candies, made for children, were tinted with brightly coloured mineral pigments built on lead and other poisons, so that a child's treat could be a small dose of metal. Mustard was brightened with lead chromate, pickles greened with copper, and preserves and sauces coloured with whatever cheap pigment gave the most appetising hue. The food was not merely cheated. Some of it was actively decoratively poisonous. It took dogged work to expose all this, a few stubborn chemists peering through microscopes at samples bought from ordinary shops and publishing, item by item, exactly what was in the nation's groceries. Their findings were damning enough over enough years to shame the country into its first real food laws. But for a long time the pantry remained a place where almost nothing was quite what it claimed, and the careful housewife inspecting her purchases had no real defence beyond suspicion. In modern terms, imagine that the bread was padded with chalk, the milk was watered and dyed, the tea was somebody's leftovers painted to look new, and the children's sweets were coloured with heavy metal, all without a single label to warn you, and not a single law to stop it. Imagine shopping in total good faith, and being quietly cheated and mildly poisoned in roughly equal measure. We scan ingredient lists and debate additives by name. They bought bread and hoped it was mostly bread. You eat anyway, because you must, your enriched food on your leaching plates, and then you prepare to lace yourself into the day's most fashionable discomfort. The corset is waiting, and it does not believe in deep breathing. Now for the corset, that architectural marvel of whalebone and willpower, laced tight enough to give you the tiny waist the era adores, and, according to every alarm doctor of the day, to gently rearrange your internal organs while it is at it. Whether corsets were quite as lethal as Victorian physicians shrieked is still cheerfully debated today. But the lived experience was not subtle. Shallow breathing, fainting spells, and the constant low-grade sensation of being slowly hugged to death by your own underwear. You're not simply getting dressed. You're climbing into a beautiful, fashionable vice and asking someone to tighten it until you can no longer fully exhale. The corset was the foundation of the fashionable shape, a stiffened garment ribbed with strips of whalebone or steel and drawn tight at the back with laces, narrowing the waist to the prized hourglass. Most women wore one as a matter of course, laced to a sensible firmness, and went about their lives perfectly well. The danger lived at the extreme end, in the pursuit of the very smallest waist, where the lacing was hauled in hard, often by a second person braced for the effort, until the ribs were squeezed and the breath came in shallow little sips. The doctors of the age were apocalyptic about it. They warned that tight lacing crushed the lungs, displaced the liver and stomach, weakened the back, ruined digestion, caused fainting and weakness, and did terrible harm in pregnancy. Medical journals and advice books were thick with grim illustrations of squeezed and shifted organs, and the corset was blamed for a long list of feminine ailments. Some of this was genuine concern, and some of it was the age's fondness for lecturing women about their bodies, and modern scholars have spent a good deal of effort untangling which warnings held up and which were moral panic dressed as medicine. The honest answer is somewhere in the middle, which is less satisfying than a clean villain. The lurid tales of corset snapping ribs and skewering organs are mostly myth, and women were not dropping dead in droves from lacing. But the real effects were real enough. A tightly laced wearer truly did breathe more shallowly, truly did faint more readily in a hot, crowded room, truly could feel her ribs and her patience compressed by hours in the thing. Long, habitual, extreme lacing could leave its mark on the body over time. It was not the instant killer of legend, but it was as daily, wearing discomfort embraced for the sake of a silhouette. In modern terms, imagine a garment so central to looking presentable that nearly everyone wore one, in a form that ranged from mildly restrictive to genuinely punishing, with the fashionable extreme leaving you light-headed, short of breath, and dependent on someone else to lace you into it each morning. Imagine your own doctor warning you against it in the gravest terms, while the fashion plates insisted you tighten it further. We complain about stiff jeans and a tight waistband. They were laced into a rigid cage and told to smile through the swooning. A little faint, a little breathless. You finish dressing and steady yourself. The house is awake now, the family is stirring, and there are small ones to see to. So let us look in on the youngest members of the household in the brightest, sweetest, most carefully decorated room of all. It is also, as it happens, the most dangerous. Let us look in on the children, those precious little heirs, tucked away in a bright, cheerful nursery that is, if anything, even more dangerous than the rest of the house. The toys are painted with lead. The walls are the same poisoned green as everywhere else. The fire has no proper guard. And when the baby will not stop crying, there is a soothing syrup on hand sold specifically for infants, whose active ingredient is opium. It quiets the child beautifully. It also quieted a great many children permanently. In this house, the nursery is not the safe room. It is simply the room where the victims are shortest and trust you the most. Consider how every hazard we have met so far lands hardest here. The lead paint that flakes off the woodwork is at its most lethal when the liquor is a teething infant who puts everything in its mouth. The arsenic green that breathes from the walls fills a room where a small body, growing fast, soaks up poison most eagerly. The toys, painted in cheerful, bright colours, drew those colours from the same lead and arsenic as everything else, so that the child's favourite plaything was a thing to be chewed and a thing to be feared in equal measure. The nursery gathered the whole house's poisons and pointed them at the people least able to survive them. Then there was the matter of the crying. A fretful, teething, sleepless infant is exhausting in any century, and the Victorians had a tidy, terrible solution. The soothing syrups sold for children were laced with opium or morphine, and they worked exactly as a powerful narcotic works on a tiny body. The child stopped crying. The child grew calm, then drowsy, then deeply, peacefully still. Overworked mothers and nursemaids, desperate for rest, dosed infants daily by the spoonful from a bottle that promised nothing but gentle relief, and a heartbreaking number of those infants simply slipped under and did not surface. The open fire added its own danger. A nursery hearth without a proper guard was an invitation to disaster, and small children in flammable nightclothes toddled near it constantly. Even the well-meant remedies were perilous, with teething powders that contained mercury handed out to ease a baby's sore gums, contributing their slow harm to a body already burdened by everything else in the room. The nursery was furnished with love, decorated with care, and quietly stocked with nearly every poison the century had to offer. In modern terms, imagine the room you prepare most lovingly for your child being the one with poison on the walls, heavy metal on the toys, an unguarded fire in the corner, and a narcotic on the shelf labelled as a children's remedy. Imagine using all of it in good faith, because the toys were pretty, the room was sweet, and the syrup did make the baby sleep. We childproof outlets and test paint for safety. They tucked the little ones into the most dangerous room in the house and called it the nursery. It is a grim thought to dwell on, so let us step back out into the wider house and consider a danger that threatened everyone equally, young and old, rich and poor. It is the danger humming beneath every comfort we've discussed, the one that powered the lamps and the fires and the cooking and the warmth. The whole house, top to bottom, runs on open flame. Consider for a moment just how much of your home runs on fire. The lamps are fire. The cooking is fire. The heating is fire. The light by which you read in bed is a naked candle balanced on a wooden table beside flammable curtains, flammable bedding, and your wonderfully flammable nightgown. There are no smoke alarms, no extinguishers, no fire brigade worth the name in many areas, and your house is built largely of wood, cloth, and optimism. A single-tipped candle, a stray ember, a sleeve too close to the grate, and the cosy glow that lulled you to sleep becomes the thing that wakes the entire street. You live, quite literally, inside a tinderbox you set alight on purpose every night. Every source of light and warmth and heat in the home was a small, contained, hopeful fire, and there were dozens of them. Candles on the tables and stairs, oil lamps in the parlour, gas jets on the walls, coal fires in the grates, a cooking range roaring in the kitchen. From dusk onward, the house glowed with live flame in every room, tended by tired people moving in dim light, surrounded by exactly the materials a fire most enjoys. The curtains, the bedding, the upholstery, the rugs, the clothing, the wooden furniture and floors and stairs, all of it dry, draped, and eager. The opportunities for catastrophe were endless and ordinary. A candle carried up to bed and set too close to the curtains. A coal popping out of an unguarded grate onto a rug. A lamp knocked over by an elbow or a cat. A long sleeve or a wide skirt brushing a flame, as we've already seen. A child left for a moment near the fire. Reading in bed by candlelight. The single most relaxing way to begin a house fire ever devised, with the reader dozing off and the flame burning on beside the pillow. Each of these was a daily occurrence in a daily setting, and any of them could end the house. And when fire did take hold, help was thin. Organised firefighting was patchy and slow, in many places little more than a bucket chain and a prayer, and water itself was not always close to hand. A fire that got a grip on a home built of timber and stuffed with fabric moved fast, and it rarely stopped at one house, leaping happily to the neighbours down a crowded terrace. The same flame that made the home livable made it, at every hour, a candidate for sudden destruction, and the people inside lived with that risk so constantly that they mostly stopped thinking about it. In modern terms, imagine that every light, every meal, every bit of warmth, and every page read after dark depended on an open flame, in a house made of the most flammable things you own, with no alarm to wake you, and no real help if it spread. Imagine lighting all of it, every evening, as the most normal thing in the world, and falling asleep beside a burning candle without a second thought. We jump at a smoke detector chirping for a low battery. They read themselves to sleep next to a live flame on a wooden nightstand. It is little wonder, then, that people feared the cold night outside and sealed themselves in tight against it. Windows shut, drapes drawn, family gathered close around the fire. Which brings us to one final suffocating habit, the one that took all of these fumes and flames and trapped them deliberately in the room with you. It is a chilly evening, so you do the responsible thing and shut every window tight, draw the heavy drapes and seal the family snugly into a warm, airless box. There is a popular fear of night air, that mysterious outdoor menace blamed for all manner of ills, so the goal each evening is to keep the fresh air firmly outside where it belongs. Inside, meanwhile, the gas lamps are busily eating the oxygen and replacing it with their own special fumes. The fire is adding more, and 10 lungs are working through whatever remains. You're not keeping the family safe and warm. You're slowly turning the parlour into a beautifully furnished jar with the lid screwed on. The fear of night air was deeply held and entirely sincere. Generations had grown up believing that the air of the night time, especially the cool, damp outdoor sort, carried sickness on it, and that the prudent household sealed itself against this nightly menace the moment the sun went down. Windows were shut, gaps were stuffed, curtains were drawn heavy across the glass, and the family settled in for the evening inside a room sealed as tightly as it could be managed. The instinct was to keep the bad air out. The effect was to keep all the worse air in, because the room was anything but empty of threats. The gas lamps, as we have seen, consumed the oxygen and exhaled carbon monoxide and other fumes. The coal fire added its own smoke and gases whenever the chimney sulked. Several people sat breathing in the same closed space for hours, steadily turning fresh air into stale. The result was a warm, stuffy, dim, lightly poisoned atmosphere that thickened as the evening wore on, leaving everyone heavy-headed, drowsy and faintly unwell, and crediting it all to a cosy night in rather than a slow shortage of good air. The cruel irony is that the one thing that would have helped, an open window and a through draught of that dreaded night air, was the very thing the household worked hardest to prevent. A handful of reformers were beginning to preach the gospel of ventilation, insisting that fresh air was a friend and not a foe, that the sick room in particular needed airing rather than sealing, and that stuffiness itself was a danger. They were right, and they were swimming against centuries of conviction that the night meant to harm you, and that warmth and safety meant shutting it firmly out. In modern terms, imagine deliberately sealing your home airtight every evening, against fresh air specifically, while indoors you ran several open flames that ate the oxygen and gave off poison, and then attributing the resulting headaches and heavy drowsiness to a pleasant night by the fire. Imagine treating an open window as a genuine health hazard, and a sealed, fume-filled parlour as the safe, sensible choice. We crack a window for a bit of air without thinking. They bricked themselves in with the fumes and called it snug. So there sits the family, sealed in their warm, dim, gently poisoned box, having survived a single day in a house that attacked them from the walls, the water, the food, the clothes, the medicine, and the very air. And we are not finished. We have toured the rooms you can see, but the house keeps its worst secrets in the places you rarely look, in the cellar and the bathroom and the spaces behind the walls, where the dangers grow stranger still. Word is spreading about a wonderful new material, a soft, fibrous mineral that can be woven into cloth, packed around your boiler and stuffed into your walls, and best of all, it simply will not burn. In a home perpetually one candle away from catastrophe, fireproof sounds like a gift from the heavens. So in it goes, asbestos, lining the pipes, insulating the stove, wrapped lovingly around the very heart of your home. No one yet knows that its tiny invisible fibres, once breathed in, settle into the lungs and stay there for the rest of a life it fully intends to shorten. It is the rare household hazard that waits decades before presenting the bill, and it always collects. After everything we have toured, you can understand the appeal. This is a house of open flame and flammable everything, a place where a stray spark can take the whole terrace, where dresses burn and combs flare and reading in bed is a gamble. And here, at last, comes a material that laughs at fire, spun into cloth it will not catch. Packed around a hot pipe it holds the heat and shrugs off the flame. Wrapped around the boiler and tucked into the gaps, it promised the one thing this house desperately lacked, a defence against burning to the ground. To a frightened homeowner, it looked like salvation in mineral form. So it spread, quietly, into the bones of the better houses and the busier buildings. It lagged the pipes and the boilers. It lined the spaces around the hearth. It was woven into fireproof curtains and protective cloth, and 100 sensible safety measures, every one of them genuinely reducing the risk of the fast, obvious death by fire. The trouble was that in solving the danger everyone could see, It introduced a danger no one could see at all, and would not learn to see for a very long time. Because asbestos kills slowly, and on a delay so long that cause and effect come unstuck. Its fibres are fine beyond seeing, and when the material is cut, crumbled, or disturbed, those fibres drift into the air and are breathed deep into the lungs, where they lodge and stay, working their quiet harm across decades. A person might breathe them in their 30s and pay the price in their 60s, by which time no one was looking at the cosy fireproof lagging around the old boiler. The bill arrived so late and so quietly that for generations nobody connected the wonder material to the wreckage it left in the chest. That delay was the whole cruelty of it. Every other danger in this house at least had the decency to act while you could still suspect it. The wallpaper made you ill in the green room. The fire burned you the same night. The poison worked over weeks or months, but the miracle mineral sat in the walls being helpful, being safe, being fireproof, and only generations later did the world realize that the very thing installed to save lives had been planting a long, patient harm in the lungs of everyone who lived alongside it. In modern terms, imagine a safety upgrade so reassuring that you packed it into every wall and wrapped it around every pipe, congratulating yourself on finally being protected, and imagine the bill for that protection arriving 40 years later, payable by your lungs with no warning and no refund. We tear it out now in sealed suits with respirators. They tucked it in by hand and slept soundly, fireproof at last. Not every threat in the house hides behind the plaster, though. Some sit out in the open, on the mantelpiece, staring at the guests with 2 glass eyes. On the mantel sits a glass dome, and inside it, frozen mid-glare, is a magnificent stuffed owl, because no respectable parlour is complete without a dead animal staring at the guests. The Victorians adored taxidermy, filling their homes with preserved birds, beasts, and the occasional deeply unsettling kitten tableau. To keep all that fur and feather from rotting, the specimens were treated with arsenical soap, a preservative so generous with the arsenic that these decorative corpses remain mildly poisonous to this very day. Your cherished ornaments are not merely creepy. They are slowly off-gassing the same poison as your walls, your dress, and your snacks, completing the home's truly committed theme. The taxidermy craze ran deep and strange. A respectable home displayed nature conquered and arranged. Songbirds under glass, a fox caught mid-snarl, a case of butterflies, perhaps a beloved family pet preserved forever in a favourite pose. The truly enthusiastic went further, into elaborate little scenes of small animals dressed in clothes and posed at weddings, schoolrooms and tea parties, whole tableau of stuffed kittens and rabbits, acting out human life with glassy, eternal smiles. It was sentimental, scientific and macabre all at once, and it was everywhere. The problem was the preservation. Dead flesh, fur and feather want very much to rot, and the great enemy of any specimen was decay and the insects that came with it. The solution, used for generations, was a preservative soap loaded with arsenic, brushed and worked into the skin of every specimen to poison anything that might try to eat or rot it. It worked beautifully. The bug stayed away, the specimen kept its shape and colour, and the household acquired a charming ornament that happened to be saturated in one of the deadliest poisons known. That arsenic did not politely vanish once the job was done. It stayed in the skin and feathers, and it lingers there still, which is why the preserved animals of this era remain genuinely hazardous to handle even now, long after their makers and owners have turned to dust themselves. In the home, the dome of birds on the mantel and the snarling fox in the hall were one more quiet source of the poison that already breathed from the walls and shimmered on the dresses. The family dusted them, admired them, let the children peer at them, all while the lovely dead things added their share to the household's generous arsenic budget. And the obsession with dead nature did not stay on the mantel. Fashion demanded it too, with whole stuffed birds and great sprays of feathers piled onto hats, so that a lady might walk out wearing an entire preserved creature, arsenic and all, perched above her poisoned face powder and her arsenic green gown. The natural world, killed, treated, and mounted, became decor and costume alike, toxic from beak to tail. In modern terms, imagine decorating your home with poison-soaked corpses arranged in adorable little scenes, dusting them fondly, and considering the whole display a mark of taste and refinement, while they quietly contributed to the same poison cloud as everything else you owned. We keep a houseplant in a framed photo. They kept a glass dome of arsenic-pickled songbirds and called it a centrepiece. Enough of the parlour and its staring ornaments. Let us go down, below the cheerful rooms, to the dark foundation that fed every fire in the house. Mind the stairs. It is gloomy down here, and dusty, and the air has a heaviness to it. Let us descend to the coal cellar, that dark, dusty cavern beneath the house, where the fuel for all those lethal fires is heaped in a great black mountain. The air down here is thick with fine coal dust that coats the lungs of whoever hauls it, usually a servant, usually daily. Stored coal can quietly release gases of its own, and in poorly ventilated cellars it has been known to do far worse than make you cough. Every scuttle carried upstairs feeds the fires that smoke your family, while the cellar itself sits there, a grimy, flammable, faintly gassy basement of doom directly under everyone's feet. It is the engine room of the death trap, and someone has to shovel it. A house that runs on fire needs an enormous amount of fuel, and so the coal arrived by the cartload and was tipped down a chute into the cellar, where it sat in a black heap waiting to be carried up, bucket by heavy bucket, to every grate in the building. This was relentless work, done in the dark, in the dust, day after day, and it was the foundation on which all the cosy upstairs warmth depended. Without that black mountain in the basement, the lamp stayed unlit, the range went cold, and the house froze. With it, the cellar became a hazard all its own. The first danger was simply the dust. Coal sheds a fine black powder that hangs in the still cellar air, settles on every surface, blackens the skin and clothes, and fills the lungs of anyone working down there. Breathe it long enough, daily, year after year, and it does to the lungs what it does to a white wall, coating them, clogging them, and shortening the breath of the person condemned to haul the stuff. The grand fires upstairs were paid for, in part by the chest of whoever fed them. The second danger was less obvious and more sinister. A great heap of stored coal is not entirely inert. It can slowly release gases, and under the wrong conditions, a large pile can begin to heat itself from within and smoulder. A slow internal fire that can fill an enclosed, poorly ventilated cellar with choking, poisonous fumes, or worse, find its way to open flame. A dark basement packed with fuel, badly aired, beneath a house full of sleeping people, was not a comforting thing to have under the floorboards, however ordinary it seemed. And the cellar was, of course, intensely flammable, an entire room of the most combustible substance in the house, sitting at the base of a building made of timber and stuffed with fabric, with candles and lamps carried up and down its stairs. A single careless light in the wrong corner of the coal store could turn the foundation of the home into a furnace from the bottom up. The fuel that warmed the family was always quietly a fire waiting for an excuse. In modern terms, imagine your home's heating depended on storing a mountain of flammable, dust-shedding, faintly gas-emitting fuel in a dark basement, and on a person climbing down daily to breathe that dust and haul it up by hand. Imagine the comfort of every warm room upstairs resting on that grim, sooty cellar below. We adjust a dial, and the warmth simply appears. They kept the engine of the house in a black, choking pit and sent someone down to stoke it. And that someone, of course, was rarely the family. It was the servants, the small army who handled every danger in this house, so that the owners only had to live among them. Spare them a thought, because their day was the most lethal of all. Spare a thought for the servants, the small army of maids and boys who keep this beautiful machine of mortality running. While you merely live in the poison, they handle it. They scrub the lead paint, polish the mercury mirrors, haul the leaded water, tend the exploding boilers, and breathe the coal dust, all for a wage that would embarrass a turnip. The scullery maid has hands raw from lye and soda. The boy who cleans the flues climbs into chimneys barely wider than his own shoulders. The house may be slowly killing the family, but it is doing so at a far brisker pace for the people paid to keep it shining. Consider what keeping such a house clean actually involved. Every grate had to be raked, blackened and polished with a leaded paste rubbed in by hand. Every painted surface had to be scrubbed, releasing the lead dust into the face of the scrubber. Every mirror, every metal fitting, every floor was cleaned with harsh preparations of soda, lye, and various caustic substances that cracked and burned the skin of the hands that wielded them. The shine the family admired was bought with the raw, ruined fingers of someone working below stairs from before dawn until long after dark. The maid of all work, the lone servant of a modest household, carried the whole burden herself, and the burden was relentless. She hauled the coal up from that choking cellar and the water through the leaded pipes. She tended the temperamental range and the dangerous boiler. She emptied the chamber pots and scrubbed the floors and beat the dust from the carpets and breathed it all in. She was first up to light the fires in the cold and last to bed once they were banked. Her exposure to every hazard in the house was not occasional, like the family's, but constant and direct, the daily substance of her work. Worst of all was the work given to children. For much of the era, small boys were sent up the chimneys themselves to clean them, squeezing into flues barely wider than their bodies, scraping out the soot with their bare skin, breathing it deep into their lungs in the dark. The trade was notorious for crippling and killing the children who did it, and for a particular cancer that struck the sweeps from a life spent caked in soot, a horror documented long before anyone bothered to stop it. It took decades of campaigning to finally forbid sending children up chimneys at all, and the cruelty persisted long after it was first condemned. All of this for wages that barely covered a roof and a few meals, in a position with no security and little rest, where a servant worn out or injured by the work could simply be replaced. The family upstairs absorbed the house's poison slowly, at the gentle pace of leisure. The staff downstairs absorbed them at the brutal pace of labour, scrubbing the very surfaces that shed them, hauling the very fuel that choked them, for the privilege of a hard bed and a turnip's wage. In modern terms, imagine an entire household of dangers, and then imagine that the people most exposed to every one of them were the ones paid least to manage them, scrubbing the poison, hauling the fuel and sending children into the chimneys, all so that someone else could enjoy a clean and shining home. We grumble about chores and reach for rubber gloves. They work their hands to ruin keeping a death trap presentable. The servants drew the baths too, of course, hauling and heating the water for the family's comfort. Or, in a more modern home, the family had installed a marvellous device to do it for them. A device mounted right above the tub. A device with a temper. Fancy a hot bath? How modern of you. Mounted above your tub is a splendid new contraption called a geyser, a gas-powered water heater that promises hot water on demand and occasionally delivers a fireball instead. These early heaters had a famously relaxed attitude towards safety, prone to filling the room with gas if the flame went out, and then reintroducing that flame with enthusiasm the moment you struck a match. Bathing, an activity meant to make you clean, now came with a genuine chance of making you airborne. You're not running yourself a soothing soak. You're lighting a temperamental bomb and then sitting down naked beside it to relax. The promise was glorious. No more hauling and heating water by the bucket from the kitchen range. No more lukewarm baths poured cold by the time they were full. Instead, a clever device on the wall would heat the water as it flowed, on demand with a gas flame, and deliver a proper hot bath at the turn of a tap. For a household weary of the endless labour of hot water, it was a wonder, and the well-appointed home of the age was proud to have one looming over the tub. The execution lagged somewhat behind the promise. These early heaters worked by running water past a gas flame, and the engineering of safe gas appliances was very much a work in progress. Many had no proper flue to carry the fumes away, so they vented the products of combustion straight into the room, into the same small, steamy, sealed bathroom in which a person sat undressed and breathing deeply. The result was a quiet build-up of carbon monoxide in a confined space, and more than one bather slipped from relaxed to drowsy to gone in the warm fog of their own bath. When it was not quietly gassing you, it offered a louder option. If the flame went out while the gas kept flowing, the heater and the room around it filled with an invisible, explosive cloud, waiting with great patience for the bather to strike a match to see what was wrong or to relight the thing. The reunion of gas and flame was sudden and emphatic, turning the cosy bathroom into a scene of singed eyebrows, blown-out windows, and, in the worst cases, far more. The appliance designed to deliver comfort had a real chance of delivering you through the wall, so the simple act of taking a bath, that most innocent and cleansing of routines, became another small gamble in a house already stuffed with them. You undressed, you turned the tap, you lit the temperamental device, and you lowered yourself into the warm water beside a machine that might quietly poison the air or loudly rearrange the room. Cleanliness, the age was fond of saying, was next to godliness. In this bathroom it was also next to the gas main, and the two did not always get along. In modern terms, imagine an appliance that promised hot water on demand, and delivered it alongside a real risk of either gassing you in the tub or detonating when you lit it, mounted directly over the bath you sat in naked and trusting. Imagine being thrilled to own one. We have safety cut-offs, flues, and a quiet faith that the boiler will simply behave. They lit a fizzing gas device above the bath water and hoped today was not the day. Of course, not every danger in the house arrived disguised as a convenience. Some of it you went out and bought on purpose, in little packets, and stored cheerfully in the kitchen, because the house had rats, and the era had opinions about rats. Not every poison in the house arrived by accident. Some you bought deliberately because the house has rats, and the era's solution to rats is to leave saucers of arsenic and strychnine lying about the place. These charming substances sat in the kitchen, the pantry, the scullery, looking remarkably like ordinary flour or sugar, which led to precisely the sort of mix-up you were already imagining. Add the sticky arsenic fly papers soaking on every windowsill, occasionally wrung out by the more murderously inclined members of a household, and your home becomes a place where the line between pest control and the family dinner is alarmingly thin. You stocked the poison yourself. The house simply waited to see what you would do with it. The vermin were real and relentless, so the household armed itself accordingly, and the chemist was happy to oblige. Arsenic, strychnine, and a paste made with phosphorus were the weapons of choice against rats and mice, sold cheaply and freely, kept in the kitchen and pantry and scullery, so they would be on hand wherever the vermin ran. The home that wished to be clean and rodent-free deliberately introduced some of the most lethal substances available and stored them right beside the food. This was where the trouble began, because the poisons looked maddeningly like ordinary kitchen goods. White arsenic powder resembled flour or sugar or baking soda closely enough that the confusion was not merely possible but common. A tired cook in a dim kitchen reaching for the wrong tin could fold the rat poison into the cake, and households were occasionally wiped out by exactly this sort of innocent, fatal mix-up. A whole family poisoned by a pudding made with the contents of the wrong jar. The law eventually demanded that sold arsenic be dyed a warning colour and its sale recorded, precisely because the kitchen had become such a reliable scene of accidental death. Then there were the fly papers, those sticky sheets hung up or soaked in a saucer to catch the summer flies, many of them loaded with arsenic. Left soaking on a windowsill, a single batch of fly papers held a generous quantity of extractable poison, sitting out in the open in a sunny kitchen. This was an innocent enough convenience until it became a notorious one, because the arsenic could be soaked out of the papers and put to uses the manufacturers had not intended, a fact that featured in more than one infamous poisoning trial of the age. The humble flypaper was both a household staple and a ready-made murder kit, depending entirely on who was wringing it out. So the home that wished to defend itself against rats and flies stocked its kitchen with enough poison to kill the whole family several times over, in packets and papers that looked like groceries, and sat among the groceries, trusting everyone to remember which tin was dinner and which was death. It usually worked. The failures were spectacular. In modern terms, imagine deliberately buying lethal poison, in powder that looked exactly like flour and sugar, and storing it in the pantry next to the actual flour and sugar, then leaving sheets of more poison soaking on the windowsill, and trusting the household never to mix them up. We keep such things locked, labelled, and far from the food. They kept death in a jar on the kitchen shelf and hoped for steady hands. Between the accidental poisons and the deliberate ones, the slow ones and the sudden ones, it was only a matter of time. Eventually, in a house like this, someone takes to their bed. Eventually, in a house like this, someone takes to their bed. A fever, a persistent cough, a wasting weakness the doctors call consumption, and we now call tuberculosis. The sick room becomes the centre of the household, which is unfortunate, because the prevailing wisdom is to seal it up tight, keep out the fresh air, and let the whole family take turns sitting in the warm, stagnant, contagious gloom. There are no antibiotics, no real understanding of germs in many homes, and the same poisoned walls and fumes that helped cause the illness now keep the patient company. The house does not pause its work when you are sick. If anything, it senses an opening. Illness was a constant guest in this century, and the great killer was consumption, the slow wasting disease of the lungs that drained the colour and the flesh from its victims over months and years. It was so common that it was half romanticised. The pale, fading, delicate look of the consumptive even creeping into fashion, which is a grim thing to admire. Alongside it ran a whole roster of fevers and contagions that swept through households and neighbourhoods, striking children especially hard, so that the sick room was rarely empty for long. When illness came, the household gathered around it in exactly the wrong way. The instinct, born of the same fear of night air we've already met, was to seal the sick room tight, shut the windows, draw the curtains, and keep the patient warm in a still, closed, airless space. Family members took turns sitting with the sufferer in that stagnant gloom, breathing the same unmoving air, and for the contagious diseases this was a near-perfect arrangement for passing the illness from the sick to the well. The loving vigil at the bedside was, for many a family, how the next member caught their death, and the sick room was no refuge from the house's other hazards. The patient lay in a bed in a room with the same arsenic-papered walls, the same leaded paint, the same gas lamp eating the air, the same coal fire adding its fumes, all of it now concentrated on a body already weakened and fighting for breath. The very environment that had helped wear the household down over years now surrounded the sickest member at the moment of greatest vulnerability, sealed in for warmth and quiet, marinating in the accumulated poisons of the home. There was little real help to offer. Without antibiotics, without a clear grasp of how disease spread in many homes, without effective treatment for the great killers, care was mostly a matter of keeping the patient warm, fed, and comfortable, and waiting to see which way it would go. The body either rallied or it did not, and a great many did not. The sick room was where the long, slow accumulation of the century's dangers often came due, all at once, in a single failing chest, in a sealed and shadowed room. In modern terms, imagine that when someone fell seriously ill, the considered response was to seal them in an airless room, gather the family in close to breathe the same contagious air, and surround the patient with the very poisons that helped sicken them, all while having almost nothing effective to treat the actual disease. We isolate, ventilate, and medicate. They sealed the windows, pulled up a chair, and took turns catching it. Still, one did not simply lie there untreated. A doctor would be sent for, and the doctor would arrive with a bag of remedies. The remedies, it must be said, were frequently more dangerous than the disease. When illness strikes, the doctor arrives, and the treatments he brings are frequently more dangerous than the disease. He may prescribe mercury until your gums bleed and your teeth loosen, a sign cheerfully interpreted as the medicine working. He may apply leeches, blistering plasters, or a tonic of arsenic to perk you right up. He may dose you with so much opium that the cough certainly stops, along with several other essential functions. Victorian home medicine operated on a simple, confident principle. If the patient is not visibly suffering from the treatment is probably too gentle. In this house, even being cured is a calculated risk. The medicine of the age still leaned heavily on the old idea that illness was something to be driven out of the body by force, and force it applied. A favourite tool was a mercury preparation given to purge the patient violently, dosed until the telltale signs of mercury poisoning appeared: the sore mouth, the bleeding gums, the loosening teeth, the flowing saliva. Far from alarming the physician, these signs were taken as proof that the medicine had taken hold and was doing its work, so the dosing continued. The patient was being poisoned on purpose, and the poisoning was the point. Then there was the long tradition of drawing out the bad by drawing out the blood. Though the great age of heroic bloodletting was beginning to fade, the leeches were still very much in business, applied to the skin to draw off what was thought to be excess or corrupted blood. A seriously ill patient, already weak, might be relieved of a quantity of blood they could ill afford to lose, in the sincere belief that this would help. Alongside the leeches came the blistering plasters, deliberately applied to raise painful blisters on the skin, the theory being that drawing irritation to the surface would pull the illness out from within. The treatment was agony, applied with conviction, and of course the cabinet we have already toured stood ready to assist. The cough was quieted with opium, in doses heavy enough to silence not just the cough, but the breathing, the appetite, and the wakefulness along with it. The flagging spirits were lifted with arsenic tonics. The whole apparatus of mercury, leeches, blisters, opium and poison was deployed against a body already battling disease in a poisoned room, so that the sufferer now had to survive 2 assaults at once, the illness and its remedy, and it was not always clear which posed the greater threat. The deeper trouble was the confidence behind it all. The physician genuinely believed in these methods, and the patient genuinely trusted them, so there was no break on the treatment beyond the patient's endurance. A cure that left you sicker was simply read as a cure not yet finished, and the dosing pressed on. To recover it all in such hands was often less a triumph of medicine than a triumph of a stubborn body surviving everything done to help it. In modern terms, imagine falling ill and having the doctor respond by poisoning you with a heavy metal until your teeth loosened, bleeding you with leeches, blistering your skin on purpose, and dosing you with narcotics until your breathing slowed, all in deadly earnest, all believed to be helping. Imagine that the worse you felt from the treatment, the more convinced everyone was that it must be working. We measure doses to the milligram and worry about side effects. They poisoned you toward health and called the bleeding gums a good sign. If you survive both the sickness and the cure, the day at last draws to a close. The light fades, the family climbs the stairs, and you return to where this whole long ordeal began, the lovely green bedroom, to do it all again tomorrow. At last, the long day is done, and you climb the stairs to bed, back to where we began, in the lovely green bedroom with the arsenic walls. You bank the coal fire down low, sealing the embers and a little extra carbon monoxide in for the night. You blow out the candle, trusting it not to smoulder. You settle beneath the heavy blankets in your flammable nightgown, breathing slow and shallow in the warm, sealed, faintly poisonous dark. You feel safe. You feel cozy. You feel, in fact, exactly as the house wants you to feel, right up until morning, when the whole gentle, beautiful, lethal routine begins again. Think back over the day you have survived. You woke beside walls that breathe poison and washed in water drawn through lead. You painted your face with metal and sweetened your blood with tonics and dressed in flammable layers tinted with arsenic. You ate adulterated food from leaching plates, dosed yourself from a cabinet of narcotics, and breathed the fumes of lamps and fires in sealed and stuffy rooms. You moved all day through a house that attacked you quietly from every direction, and you noticed almost none of it, because none of it announced itself, and because this was simply what a day was. Now, at the end of it, you perform the small bedtime rituals that each carry their own little hazard. You bank the fire, raking the embers low and covering them to keep them alive until morning, which also keeps a slow trickle of carbon monoxide seeping into the closed bedroom through the night. You blow out the candle on the nightstand, trusting that the wick truly goes cold and does not smoulder on the wooden surface beside the curtains. You climb into bed in a nightgown that would catch in an instant should any of those trusts prove misplaced. And then you do the most natural thing in the world. You settle in, you pull up the heavy blankets, and you breathe the warm, still, sealed air of a room whose walls are quietly working even now, especially now, in the damp cool of the night when the windows are shut tight against the air that might actually save you. You breathe slowly, shallowly, the way a body does in sleep, drawing in whatever the room has to offer for the next 8 hours, undefended, unconscious, and entirely at the house's mercy. The remarkable thing, the thing worth sitting with, is how safe it all feels. There is no sense of danger, no alarm, no warning. There is a warm bed, a banked fire, a dark and quiet room, the whole comforting architecture of home wrapped snugly around a person who has no idea that comfort and harm have, in this house, become the very same thing. You drift off feeling cared for, which is exactly the feeling the house has spent all day cultivating. In modern terms, imagine ending each day by sealing yourself into a warm, dark room that you have every reason to trust and every reason, unknowingly, to fear, and falling deeply, peacefully asleep there, night after night, while the place you love most works quietly against you in the dark. We check the locks and set the alarm and rest easy. They banked the fire, blew out the candle, and slept soundly inside the trap, certain they were home. And so the nights pass, and the days, and the years, each one adding its small invisible measure to the tally, until one quiet, unremarkable day, the tally comes due, and the house, patient as it has always been, finally collects. And one day, the house wins. It is rarely dramatic. There is no single villain, no obvious blow, just the slow accumulation of 100 small poisonings. The cough that never quite left, the headaches, the fatigue, the personality that quietly faded over years. The doctor records something vague and respectable. The family mourns in the proper fashion, draping the mirrors, stopping the clocks, dressing in black for months on end, and laying out the departed in the very parlour that helped do them in. Then, in time, life resumes within those same green walls, under those same fumes, and the house, patient as ever, simply turns its attention to whoever is left. This is the thing to understand about how the house killed. It almost never did so all at once. The fire and the explosion and the poisoned pudding took their sudden victims, yes, but the deeper, steadier toll was invisible and slow. It was the arsenic from the walls and the dresses and the dead birds, the lead from the pipes and the paint and the powder, the mercury and the coal smoke and the gas fumes, all of it building quietly in a body over years, expressed as nothing more alarming than a person who was tired and grey and not quite themselves, fading by degrees until they faded altogether. When the end came, the cause was rarely named for what it was. The doctor wrote down a fever, a wasting, a weakness of the constitution, some respectable and final-sounding phrase, and no one thought to blame the wallpaper, the plumbing, or the lovely green gown. The house kept its secret because its method was patience, and patience leaves no fingerprints. A poison that takes years to work is simply mistaken for the ordinary frailty of being alive in a hard century. Then the household turned to the elaborate business of Victorian mourning, which the age performed with unmatched seriousness. The mirrors were draped so the spirit would not be trapped in the glass. The clocks were stopped at the hour of death. The blinds were drawn. The family was wrapped in deep black for a strictly observed span of months, and the body was laid out and watched over in the front parlour, that best room kept for occasions, which now hosted the most solemn occasion of all. The departed lay in state in the very heart of the home that had worn them down, surrounded by the same walls and air and ornaments, mourned in the place where it happened, and then, as it always does, life resumed. The black was eventually set aside, the mirrors uncovered, the clocks restarted, the parlour returned to its ordinary use. The family went on living in the same house, sleeping in the same green rooms, drinking the same water, breathing the same fumes, with no reason to suspect the home itself, because the home looked exactly as lovely and as safe as it ever had. And the house, having taken its time and taken its due, simply carried on, patient and beautiful and quietly lethal, turning its slow attention to whoever remained beneath its roof. In modern terms, imagine living a whole life inside something you trusted completely, that harmed you so gradually and so gently that neither you nor anyone who loved you ever thought to name it, so that when it finally won, it was mourned alongside you rather than blamed. We test our homes for the things we cannot see and sleep easier for it. They lived and died inside the danger, never knowing it was there, and the house never once gave itself away. That was a single life in a Victorian home, beautiful and comfortable and slowly fatal from the wallpaper inward. And remarkably, astonishingly, people lived this way by the millions, and built families, and laughed, and grew old where they could, inside the loveliest death traps ever decorated. So there it is, a single day spent inside the loveliest death trap ever decorated. You woke beneath wallpaper that breathed arsenic, washed your face in lead, painted your skin with poison, and drank water that may or may not have been quietly trying to finish you off. You lit lamps that gassed you, fires that smoked you, and a bathroom heater that might have launched you through the roof. You dressed in flammable skirts, clipped tiny explosives into your hair, wore the deadliest colour of the season, and ate bread padded with chalk off plates that leached metal into your dinner. And then, exhausted, you sealed yourself into a warm, dim, faintly poisonous room and slept the sleep of the perfectly content, because nothing in that beautiful house ever looked like a threat. And yet here is the wonderful, stubborn truth. People live this way by the millions. They raise their children in those green rooms gathered by those smoky fires, laughed around those leaded tables, and built whole rich lives inside walls that were slowly working against them. They did not know the danger, and still they endured it, decorated it, and made it home. That is the quiet miracle threaded through all of this. Even surrounded by invisible harm, people kept loving, hoping, and carrying on. So tonight, as you settle into your clean bed, in your safe, tested, gently humming home, with water you can trust and air you can breathe and not a single arsenic flower looping across the wall, take a soft breath and let the gratitude settle over you like a blanket. You're warm. You're safe. The walls are only walls. Let your eyes grow heavy, let the day drift away, and rest easy. Good night.